It was a typical afternoon at the luxurious Grand Oak Hotel, where the well-to-do lounged in leather armchairs, sipping on cocktails and discussing their business ventures. Behind the scenes, though, a different story was unfolding. Far from the world of fine dining and first-class service, Sam, the elderly janitor who had worked at the hotel for decades, quietly went about his duties. His slow but steady pace reflected years of hard work and dedication. Sam didn't say much. He never had to. His presence alone told the story of someone who had weathered the years with dignity. Despite being overlooked and sometimes mocked by the newer hotel staff, the hotel's young, ambitious owner, Michael, was notorious for his temper and lack of respect for the staff. To him, people like Sam were invisible, or worse, obstacles to maintaining the pristine image of his hotel. Michael was a man obsessed with appearances, wealth, and status, qualities he flaunted at every chance. He'd never stopped to consider the stories behind those who worked for him, especially not someone like Sam. As far as he was concerned, the old janitor was a relic, long past his prime, and not fit to work in a place as prestigious as the Grand Oak. But Michael was in for a surprise that would turn his world upside down. One day, after a particularly busy lunch hour, Michael noticed Sam moving slowly through the marble-floored lobby, his mop in hand. The sight of the elderly man carefully cleaning up the mess of high-end guests irritated Michael. With his mind on profit margins and luxury standards, he walked up to Sam, barely able to mask his disdain. "Do you ever move any faster?" Michael scoffed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. A few guests nearby raised their eyebrows but remained silent, their attention caught by the scene unfolding. Sam, with his worn hands and quiet eyes, simply looked up at the hotel owner, not saying a word. He'd dealt with worse over the years. Michael wasn't done. He wanted to make an example of Sam to show the staff and anyone who might be watching that he wasn't afraid to put people in their place. "You know, this isn't some run-down motel. People here expect high standards. Not someone like you dragging their feet around," he said, his voice growing louder with each word. "Maybe it's time you hang up that mop for good. We need people who can keep up, not hold us back." Still, Sam said nothing. He just nodded slightly and continued with his work. He'd heard insults before, and he knew better than to let them get to him. But little did Michael know, his outburst hadn't gone unnoticed by everyone. Sitting quietly in one of the restrooms, stalls just around the corner, was a man in a hat and sunglasses, trying to keep a low profile. That man was none other than Johnny Depp, one of the biggest stars in the world, and he had heard every word. Johnny wasn't in town for any movie shoot or big event. In fact, he had come to the Grand Oak to take a break from the chaos of his public life. He'd been enjoying his quiet afternoon until Michael's arrogant voice interrupted his peace. Sitting there in the stall, Johnny couldn't believe what he was hearing. The way the hotel owner was treating Sam was beyond disrespectful, and something inside him stirred. He wasn't just a bystander. He knew he had to do something. As Johnny listened, a plan began to form in his mind. He had seen enough people in power abuse their positions, and he wasn't about to let it happen again, especially not to someone like Sam, who was just trying to do his job. But for now, Johnny stayed quiet. He wanted to see how this would play out, gathering every bit of information before making his move. Meanwhile, Michael, still riding the wave of his self-importance, turned his back on Sam and stormed off, thinking he had successfully humiliated the old janitor. He couldn't have been more wrong. Unbeknownst to him, a Hollywood legend had witnessed the whole thing, and Johnny Depp was about to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. But what would Johnny do next? Would he confront Michael directly? Or would he find another way to turn the tables? One thing was for sure. Things were about to get interesting at the Grand Oak Hotel. Stay tuned for the next part, where the story takes an unexpected twist that will leave you speechless. As Michael strutted away, feeling satisfied with himself, Sam quietly went back to his work. He wasn't the type to fight back with words. He never had been. Years of being looked down upon for the color of his skin and his age had made him resilient, but it had also taught him when to pick his battles. Sam was a man of few words, yet his silence spoke volumes. He'd seen young men like Michael before, people who thought they owned the world just because they had money, but Sam had something they didn't: wisdom, patience, and a strength that came from a life of hard work. Meanwhile, Johnny Depp sat silently in the restroom, thinking about what he had just witnessed. His mind raced through the countless times he had seen people like Michael treat others poorly simply because they thought they could. He couldn't let it go. Sam didn't deserve to be treated that way, and Johnny knew he had the power to do something about it. But this wasn't about making a scene or drawing attention to himself. Johnny wanted to handle it differently, quietly, but with impact. Johnny had always been known for his kindness and humility. Despite his fame, he grew up far from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, and he never forgot where he came from. That's why Sam's situation hit him so hard. He could see the years of struggle and quiet strength in the old man's face, and it reminded him of people he had known in his own life, hard-working individuals who were often mistreated or ignored. This wasn't just about Sam. It was about standing up for people who were overlooked, no matter who they were. As Johnny made his way out of the restroom, he kept his hat low, blending in with the crowd. He watched Michael bark orders at the staff from the other side of the lobby, clearly enjoying his position of power. Johnny knew he couldn't just confront Michael right there and then. It wasn't the time. Instead, he needed a plan, and he knew exactly how to go about it. What Michael didn't realize was that his behavior wasn't just catching Johnny's attention. Other staff members at the hotel had noticed it too, but they were too scared to speak up. For years they had seen how Michael treated people, how he belittled them and made them feel small. They had always kept quiet because they needed their jobs, and confronting the owner of the hotel seemed impossible. But now, with Johnny quietly watching from the sidelines, things were about to change. Back in the janitor's closet, Sam leaned his mop against the wall and sat down on a small wooden stool. His knees ached, and his back hurt from years of physical labor, but he wasn't the type to complain. He'd seen it all in his time at the Grand Oak. Guests coming and going, some kind and some not. But the disrespect he faced from Michael was nothing new. Sam had dealt with people like him before. Still, today felt different. There was something in the air, a quiet tension that he couldn't quite place. He knew something was coming, but he didn't know what. Later that evening, after most of the guests had retired to their rooms and the hotel's lobby was quieter, Johnny approached the front desk. He asked for a discreet meeting with the staff. No cameras, no attention, just a private conversation. The staff, curious but respectful, quickly arranged for Johnny to meet with them in a small conference room. As they gathered, Johnny removed his hat and glasses, revealing his identity to the astonished employees. But Johnny wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there to make a change. He spoke to the staff about what he had seen earlier, the way Michael had treated Sam, and likely the way he treated others. Johnny asked the employees to share their own stories, their own experiences working under Michael. Slowly, the stories began to pour out. Accounts of being belittled, disrespected, and made to feel unimportant. The staff, who had always felt powerless before, began to realize they weren't alone. Johnny listened carefully, nodding in agreement as each person spoke. He understood their pain, and he assured them that things could change, but only if they stood together. It wasn't about starting a fight. It was about standing up for themselves and showing Michael that he couldn't continue treating people this way. Johnny had a plan, but it required all of them to work as a team. The tension in the room was thick as the staff looked at one another, unsure if they were ready to take this step. But Johnny's calm demeanor and sincerity gave them the confidence they needed. Slowly, one by one, they agreed to stand with him, to support each other, and to ensure that Sam and anyone else was never disrespected again. The next morning, the atmosphere in the hotel felt different. There was a quiet but noticeable shift in the way the staff moved and communicated with each other. They were no longer just workers going about their tasks. They were a team, united by a common goal. As the sun rose the next morning, the Grand Oak Hotel buzzed with quiet anticipation. The staff knew what was coming, though Michael remained blissfully unaware. The plan, crafted with Johnny's help, was about to unfold. Sam, as usual, arrived, early for his shift, dressed in his worn uniform and carrying his mop. But today, he wasn't just the janitor. He was at the heart of something bigger, though he didn't fully realize it yet. Michael, in his typical fashion, walked into the lobby with his usual air of superiority, ready to start his day by bossing people around. He glanced at Sam, and for a brief moment, considered repeating his belittling words from the day before. But something stopped him. There was an odd energy in the room, a kind of quiet resistance he hadn't noticed before. The staff moved differently, less afraid, more confident. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it bothered him. As Michael headed toward the front desk, his attention was drawn to a familiar face in the lobby. Johnny Depp was sitting in one of the plush leather chairs, casually flipping through a magazine, his signature hat and sunglasses now gone. For a second, Michael froze, his mind racing. He recognized Johnny immediately, but before he could react, Johnny calmly stood up and made his way toward him, a polite smile on his face. "Good morning," Johnny said casually, as if they were old friends meeting by chance. "Mind if we have a quick chat?" Michael, now visibly nervous, tried to compose himself. Sure, Mr. Depp. What brings you to my hotel?" He forced a smile, hoping to cover up his surprise and anxiety. Without missing a beat, Johnny gestured towards Sam, who was quietly mopping near the front desk. "I was here yesterday," Johnny said, his voice calm but firm. "I saw how you treated that man, and I've got to say, it didn't sit well with me." Michael's face flushed, and he stammered, "I don't know what you mean. He's just a janitor." He wasn't doing his job fast enough. Johnny raised an eyebrow. "Just a janitor," he repeated, his voice soft but cutting. "You see, that's where you're wrong. There's no just about anyone. People like Sam, people who've worked their whole lives to keep places, like this running, deserve respect. More respect than you gave him." The room had grown silent. The staff, standing nearby, watched with a mixture of awe and quiet determination. They had Johnny's back, and they were ready to act if needed. Michael, feeling the eyes of his employees on him, started to panic. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it. It was just, a bad day." Johnny shook his head slowly. "It's not about a bad day. It's about how you treat people, every day. And trust me, people are watching, whether you realize it or not." At that moment, Sam, who had been quietly listening, looked up from his mop. He hadn't expected Johnny to stand up for him like this, but he felt a warmth spreading through him. something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of dignity, of being seen. Johnny turned to Sam and smiled. Sam, you've worked here for what, 20 years? 25, Sam said quietly, though there was pride in his voice now. And in all that time, you've probably seen people come and go, huh? Sam nodded. Yes, sir. Seen a lot of changes. Johnny turned back to Michael. The only thing that should be changing around here is the way you treat your staff. You think running a hotel is all about appearances, but it's really about the people who make it run. Without them, this place would fall apart. Michael, now realizing the weight of what was happening, looked around at the staff. They were no longer cowering in fear of him. They stood tall, united, no longer willing to accept his mistreatment. The power he thought he had over them was slipping away, and for the first time, he felt vulnerable. I get it, Michael muttered, though his words were hollow. He was cornered, and he knew it. I'll do better. Johnny gave a small nod. I hope you mean that, because respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, and you've got a long way to go. The tension in the air finally broke, and the staff began to relax. The moment had passed, but its impact was lasting. Michael, humbled and shaken, walked away without another word, retreating to his office, where he would have to face the reality of his actions. Sam, still holding his mop, looked at Johnny with gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, he said softly, his voice steady. Johnny smiled and patted Sam on the shoulder. You don't have to thank me, Sam. You've earned every bit of respect just by being who you are. Don't let anyone take that away from you. With that, Johnny tipped an imaginary hat to the staff, who smiled in return. He walked out of the hotel, leaving behind a room full of people who had just witnessed something unforgettable. Sam, the quiet janitor who had spent years in the background, had finally been given the respect he deserved.